The Doctor of the Dark Web. April 2013. Silk Road, the largest illegal marketplace on Earth. Somewhere in its forums, a new user appears. His username is DoctorX. He types a single post: ask a medical expert about health and drugs. He isn't selling anything. He doesn't want money. He just wants to answer questions. Within hours, the messages flood in. 10, 15, 20 a day. Users asking about overdose risks, about mixing MDMA with antidepressants, about what to do when a friend stops breathing. He reads every single one. He answers every single one. For the next 7 months, he will spend 2 to 3 hours a day on the most notorious criminal website in internet history, saving lives, one message at a time. His real name is Fernando Caudevilla. He's a licensed Spanish physician with a PhD in drug dependence. He publishes academic papers. He speaks at medical conferences. He has a family. And nobody, not even the FBI, knows he's there. Chapter 1. The System That Failed. To understand why a doctor ends up on the dark web, you have to understand what the dark web isn't. It isn't just a marketplace for criminals. It isn't just fentanyl and stolen passports. In the early 2010s, for millions of people around the world, it was the only place they could ask an honest question. Fernando had spent years watching people die from preventable overdoses, not because the drugs were always deadly, because nobody told them how to use them safely. In Spain, in clinics, he'd seen it repeatedly. A person takes MDMA at a concert. They don't know you can't mix it with certain antidepressants. Their serotonin system goes into crisis. They die. Or someone tries heroin for the first time. Nobody warned them about fentanyl contamination. Nobody warned them never to use alone. Nobody told them what to do if their breathing slows. The information existed. The medical community had it. But the medical community was not going to walk into a nightclub and hand out flyers. And a person buying drugs on the street was not going to walk into a hospital and say, "Can you help me take this more safely?" The system, Fernando believed, had built a wall. On one side, help. On the other, everyone who needed it. So, he crossed the wall. Chapter 2. The Silk Road. In 2011, a 27-year-old libertarian from Texas named Ross Ulbricht created something that would become the most discussed criminal enterprise on the internet. The Silk Road was built on two things the old world couldn't control: Tor, the anonymous browser, and Bitcoin, the untraceable currency. Together, they created a marketplace where buyers and sellers could transact in near total anonymity. By 2012, over 100,000 customers were buying drugs on the Silk Road: heroin, cocaine, MDMA, prescription medication, shipped in padded envelopes, stamped with regular postage, delivered to your door. The US government called it the most sophisticated criminal marketplace in the history of the internet. What they didn't mention was the other thing happening on the Silk Road: the forums. Because alongside the drug listings, users were talking about doses, about purity, about combinations that could kill you. A community was forming, chaotic, imperfect, anonymous, but forming nonetheless around a question nobody else was asking. How do you do this and not die? That is where Fernando found his opening. Chapter 3. DoctorX goes in. He didn't tell his colleagues, he didn't tell his employer, he didn't even tell most of his friends. He downloaded Tor, created a handle, and started reading. What he found surprised him. Yes, there were criminals. Yes, there were scammers. But there were also addicts trying to get clean who couldn't afford a clinic. There were sick people who couldn't access medication in their countries. There were curious young people who had already made their decision and simply wanted to make it as safe as possible. He opened his thread, "Ask a medical expert about health and drugs." The response was immediate. A user asked whether combining MDMA with lithium was dangerous. Fernando answered, in detail, with clinical precision, completely free of charge. Another asked about long-term liver damage from heavy alcohol use. Fernando answered. Someone described a friend showing signs of heroin overdose. Fernando walked them through emergency procedure in real time. He was answering questions that the legitimate medical community, bound by stigma and legal liability, would never answer honestly, and people were listening. Within weeks, his thread had become one of the most active forums on the entire Silk Road. Ross Ulbricht, who ran the Silk Road under the alias Dread Pirate Robbins, noticed. He reached out privately. He offered Fernando $500 a week to continue. Fernando's response, "Well, that is very generous from you." He accepted, and then he kept going. Chapter 4. What he found there. Over 7 months, Fernando sent more than 450 individual messages. He set aside 2 to 3 hours every single day. One case stayed with him. A heroin user described symptoms that looked like severe withdrawal. Fernando told him to get a second opinion. The user went to a doctor. He was diagnosed with leukemia. His life was potentially saved because a stranger on an illegal drug marketplace told him something didn't add up. Another time, a user's girlfriend overdosed while Fernando was online. He stayed on the forum in real time, providing emergency instructions while someone called an ambulance. In 7 months, Fernando never encountered a single confirmed Silk Road-related drug overdose death. Not one. Was the Silk Road safe? No, of course not. But the forums, this strange, imperfect, underground medical practice, were doing something real. And Ulbricht knew it. He approached Fernando with another idea. What if they sent drugs from the marketplace to an independent lab for testing? What if they could verify purity before it reached users? Fernando agreed. He began setting up the testing service. Then, in October 2013, the FBI shut down the Silk Road. Ulbricht was arrested in a San Francisco public library, his laptop open mid-session. Servers were seized, the marketplace went dark overnight, and Fernando's testing service, weeks away from launching, died with it.
Chapter 5. The Trial. Ross Ulbricht's trial began in January 2015. He faced charges of drug trafficking, money laundering, and running a criminal enterprise. The prosecution painted the Silk Road as a machine of death. The defense pushed back. The Silk Road, they argued, had made drug use safer. They called Fernando Caudevilla as an expert witness. He submitted a written declaration. He described the harm reduction work, the answered questions, the overdose instructions, the heroin user with leukemia. He wrote that in 7 months on the platform, he had not come across a single report of a Silk Road-related drug overdose. The judge, Catherine Forrest, was not moved. In her sentencing summary, she spent considerable space dismantling the harm reduction argument, and then she turned her attention directly to Fernando. She called his work particularly despicable. She said she was blown away and infuriated by his posts. She sentenced Ross Ulbricht to life in prison. Ross sat with that word for a long time. Despicable. He had gone onto a dark web marketplace voluntarily at personal and professional risk to provide free medical advice to people the system had abandoned. He had never sold anything, never profited, never encouraged anyone to take drugs. He had only tried to keep them alive. And a federal judge had called it despicable. Chapter 6. He kept going. Fernando didn't stop. After Silk Road shut down, he moved to other dark web forums, Silk Road 2.0, the Hub. He kept the DoctorX alias, he kept answering questions. He set up the drug testing service he had promised Ulbricht, independently this time, outside any marketplace. Users could send drug samples to a lab anonymously and receive results on purity and contamination. The service is still running today. Over the years, Fernando has spoken publicly about his work. He has given interviews, published papers, appeared on panels. He has argued calmly and consistently that the war on drugs has created a wall between information and the people who need it most. That the people most likely to die from drug use are the ones least likely to receive honest medical guidance. He became the subject of a novel, DoctorX, the Doctor of the Dark Web, published in Spain in 2024, a fictional account built on his real story. He was never charged with a crime. Providing medical advice is not illegal, even on the Silk Road, even anonymously, even when a federal judge calls it despicable. Chapter 7. What it means. The Silk Road era is over. Alphabet is gone. Hansa is gone. 100 smaller markets have risen and been shut down. The game of cat and mouse continues. But the problem Fernando identified in those early years has never gone away. Drug use has not declined. Overdose deaths have increased. Fentanyl contamination has turned even recreational use into a lottery. In 2023 alone, over 107,000 Americans died from drug overdoses. The majority involved fentanyl. And still, the wall stands. The system that should provide information refuses to, because information, some argue, is permission. Because treating drug users like patients is seen as endorsing their choices. Fernando never believed that. He believed, and still believes, that a person who has already decided to use a drug deserves the same right to accurate information as any other patient walking into any other clinic. That position got him called despicable in a federal courtroom. It also got a heroin addict diagnosed with leukemia in time to be treated. Every few months, somewhere in a dark web forum, a user posts a desperate question about a friend who isn't breathing, about a dose that feels wrong, about a combination that the internet can't tell them is safe. Sometimes, if they're lucky, someone answers. And sometimes that someone is still Dr. X.